A billionaire thought he had everything until a playful waitress on the diner floor showed him what his son had been missing all along. Ethan Carter was the kind of man whose name was known in every corner of the city. He was one of those billionaires who could buy anything with a single phone call, and people around him treated him with the kind of respect that was mixed with fear. He lived in a mansion so large that guests sometimes got lost in the hallways. His garage was filled with cars that most people only ever saw in magazines. But for all the power and wealth he had, there was something missing in his life. Something so simple that money could never buy. That something was the warmth of family. Ethan was a widower. His wife Emily had passed away when their son Oliver was only a baby. Since then, Ethan had thrown himself into his work, building his company. Bigger and bigger, but at the same time, his heart grew colder. He convinced himself he was doing it for Oliver, that all the money and security would make his boy's life perfect. But deep down, he knew Oliver wasn't happy. The boy had every toy, every gadget, and every comfort, yet there was a sadness. In his little eyes, Oliver was just 5 years old, but he behaved differently from other children his age. While most kids would run around laughing, climbing, and shouting, Oliver often sat quietly by himself. He wasn't shy, but he was used to being surrounded by nannies and bodyguards who treated him like a fragile object rather than a child. He had learned early that his father was always busy, always in meetings or on the phone. The boy longed for something simple, someone who would sit on the floor and play with him, someone who would laugh with him. But no one in the Carter mansion ever did that. One evening, something unusual happened. Ethan had a rare free night. His assistant had cleared his schedule after a long day, and for once, Ethan decided to spend the evening with his son instead of burying himself in business papers. Oliver had been restless all day, the nanny reported, refusing to eat properly and throwing his toys on the floor. Ethan felt a wave of guilt. He hardly ever spent real time with his boy, and even when he did, he never really knew how to connect. But tonight, he decided to try. Instead of ordering the finest dinner to be served in their glittering dining room, Ethan made a sudden decision. He told the driver to take them into town. Oliver perked up, curious. They rarely went out without a team of staff, but tonight it was just Ethan, Oliver, and one discreet driver who waited outside. Ethan didn't even choose a fancy restaurant. For reasons he couldn't quite explain, he walked into a small family-owned diner on the corner of a quiet street. The diner smelled of fried food and coffee. The chatter of ordinary people filled the air. No one there expected to see the billionaire, who usually appeared in glossy magazines and business headlines. As Ethan entered with Oliver, the room grew quieter for a moment. A few customers whispered and pointed, recognizing him. But Ethan ignored it. For once, he wanted to just be a father, not a man whose wealth made the world tremble. Oliver looked around wide-eyed. This was new to him. He was used to polished marble floors and chandeliers, not cracked leather booths and clinking plates. Ethan guided him to a corner booth and sat down, trying to appear relaxed. But he couldn't help feeling out of place. People were staring, and he wondered if he had made a mistake. A young waitress approached their table with a notepad in hand. Her name was Lily. She was in her mid-20s, with a smile that seemed to light up her whole face. Unlike everyone else, she didn't freeze or stumble over her words when she recognized Ethan. If she knew who he was, she didn't show it. Instead, she greeted them with the same warmth she gave every customer. "Hi there. What can I get for you two tonight?" Ethan ordered a simple meal, but Oliver was restless, fidgeting with the crayons and paper placemat that Lily had placed in front of him. He started drawing, but quickly lost interest. His small hand knocked the box of crayons off the table, scattering them onto the floor. Ethan frowned, irritated. Normally, a nanny would pick them up immediately, but here it was different. Ethan hesitated, unsure if he should bend down or call someone over, before he could decide. Lily crouched down without a second thought. She got on her knees and started picking up the crayons, her ponytail swaying as she reached under the table. Oliver giggled at the sight. Instead of handing the crayons back right away, she made a game out of it. She pretended one crayon was hiding and whispered, "Where's the sneaky blue one?" "Oh, I see you hiding under the chair." She crawled a little farther, making Oliver laugh harder. To Ethan's surprise, Oliver slid off his seat and joined her under the table. He laughed for real, a bright, carefree sound that Ethan hadn't heard in a long time. The boy's small hands grabbed a red crayon, and he proudly showed it to Lily like he had discovered buried treasure. Lily clapped playfully, praising him as if he had done something amazing. Ethan sat frozen. His son was crawling on the floor of a diner with a waitress.
Ow.
And instead of looking embarrassed, Oliver was happier than he had been in months. Other customers chuckled softly, finding the scene sweet. A few whispered again, probably wondering why the billionaire was allowing his child to crawl on a dirty diner floor. But Ethan didn't stop it. Something inside him stirred as he watched, for the first time in what felt like years. Ethan saw Oliver's face light up with pure joy. No expensive toy, no private tutor, and no carefully planned trip had ever made him laugh like this. The person who had managed to do it wasn't a nanny or a teacher, but a simple waitress who had chosen to meet Oliver on his level, literally. She wasn't worried about her uniform getting dirty. She wasn't worried about what others thought. She wasn't trying to impress Ethan. She was just trying to make a little boy smile. Ethan leaned back in his seat, his chest tightening, with a mix of emotions he couldn't name. Guilt for not being able to give Oliver this kind of joy himself. At the ease with which Lily connected with his son. Curiosity, because he wanted to understand how something so small could mean so much. Oliver climbed back onto the seat, his cheeks flushed from laughing. He clutched the crayons like they were treasures, and for once, he didn't seem bored or lonely. He looked at Lily with admiration, as if she was the most wonderful person he had ever met. Ethan noticed the sparkle in his son's eyes and felt a pang of something sharp and unfamiliar. It was the realization of how much he had missed by keeping his world focused only on business. The meal hadn't even arrived yet, and already the night felt different. Ethan had come to the diner expecting nothing more than food. Instead, he was witnessing a moment that would stay with him forever. A billionaire, used to being treated like royalty, was sitting in silence, watching a waitress crawl on the floor with his son. And strangely, it was the most powerful thing he had seen in years. The chatter of the diner faded into the background as Ethan kept his eyes on Oliver, was still smiling. Something inside Ethan whispered that this small, ordinary evening might be the beginning of something that would change his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Oliver was still laughing when Lily slid the crayons back onto the table. She brushed off her apron as if nothing unusual had happened, but Ethan could not take his eyes off her. It wasn't just the way she handled his son, it was the ease with which she moved, the natural warmth that followed her every action. She didn't treat Oliver like a rich man's boy who needed to be handled carefully. And she didn't look at Ethan with the same nervousness or greed that he often saw in people. She simply treated them like they were any other customers in the diner. Oliver quickly went back to scribbling on the paper placemat with his crayons, his little face full of concentration. He leaned close to Lily as she crouched beside him, showing her every line and asking her what she thought. She nodded, praised him, and even pretended his squiggly lines looked like amazing dragons and rockets. Oliver beamed, soaking up every word. Ethan watched in silence, amazed. The boy had nannies at home who were trained in childcare, but none of them had ever looked so genuinely interested in what Oliver drew. Most of them would give a polite smile, pat him on the head, and go back to checking their phones or following Ethan's instructions. But Lily bent over, her voice excited, her smile bright, as if Oliver's simple drawing was the most important thing in the world. And in that moment, for Oliver it truly was. Ethan shifted in his seat, unused to this kind of atmosphere. He could feel the eyes of other diners on him, some curious, some amused, but he no longer cared. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen Oliver this alive, this happy. The boy was talking more in 5 minutes with Lily than he usually spoke in an entire day with his caretakers. When the food arrived, Oliver barely noticed at first. He was too busy showing Lily how he could mix red and blue crayons together to make purple. Lily laughed and told him he was a genius, which made the boy puff up with pride. Only when she gently reminded him to eat did he turn to his plate. Even then, she managed to make it fun, telling him the chicken nuggets looked like tiny dinosaurs waiting to be eaten. Oliver laughed so hard that he almost spilled his drink. Ethan caught himself smiling, something he rarely did outside of business. Deals. Watching Lily interact with Oliver felt strange, almost uncomfortable, because it highlighted something he had been avoiding. All this time he had believed providing the best of everything would make Oliver happy. But here was proof in front of him happiness wasn't in money, or in toys, or in expensive schools. It was in laughter, in play, in attention. It was in something as simple as crawling under a table for a crayon. Lily seemed to sense Ethan's gaze because she looked up at him suddenly, meeting his eyes. For a brief second, Ethan felt caught, like he had been staring too long.
Oh.
But she only gave him a polite smile before turning back to Oliver, as though she hadn't noticed the weight of his thoughts. It unsettled him.
Oh.
Had his attention, tried to hold on to it, desperate to impress. But she didn't seem to care at all. Oliver soon started making up stories about his drawings. He said the rocket he drew could fly to the moon, and that the dragon could guard the castle. Lily gasped in mock fear, playing along, and told him she would need a brave knight like him to protect the diner from such a dragon. Oliver proudly thumped his small chest and said he could do it. Ethan almost laughed out loud. He'd forgotten. His son even had this kind of imagination. A few minutes later, Oliver slid down from the booth again, tugging at Lily's apron. "Play with me again," he begged. She glanced at Ethan for a moment as if to ask silently if it was okay. Ethan surprised himself by giving a small nod. And just like that, Lily was on the floor again, letting Oliver lead her in a silly game of hiding crayons and finding them. The other customers smiled, some shaking their heads at the sight of a billionaire's child crawling on the diner floor. But Ethan wasn't embarrassed. Instead, he felt a strange sense of relief. For once, his son wasn't surrounded by cold silence or strict rules. He was just a boy laughing, running, crawling, smiling. It was everything Ethan had failed to give him, and it came so easily to this waitress he barely knew. When the game finally ended, Oliver climbed back up and leaned against Lily's arm as if he had known her forever. His small voice said softly, "You're fun." Lily ruffled his hair, answering simply, "And you're awesome." The way Oliver looked at her in that moment made Ethan's chest tighten. His son had never looked at a nanny, a teacher, or even him that way. It was the look of a child who felt seen and valued. Ethan cleared his throat, trying to bring himself back into the moment. He asked Oliver about his food, but the boy only answered in short words before turning back to Lily with another question. About crayons. Ethan realized painfully that his son found it easier to talk to a stranger than to his own father. The thought burned, but it also opened his eyes. As the meal went on, Ethan kept watching the two of them together. He saw how naturally Lily laughed with Oliver, how she never once checked the clock or looked tired, even though she was clearly working a busy shift. She balanced serving other tables with coming back to check on Oliver, and each time, the boys' eyes lit up as if she had returned just for him. Ethan felt a storm of emotions inside. He was proud that Oliver was finally laughing. He was grateful to Lily for bringing out this side of his son. But he was also ashamed that it took a stranger to do what he had failed to do all these years. He thought of Emily, his late wife, and how she had always known how to make Oliver giggle even when he was a baby. She used to crawl on the carpet, making silly faces, filling the house with laughter. Ethan had buried those memories, convincing himself that Oliver would forget them too. But clearly, what Oliver needed most was the very thing Ethan had stopped giving the warmth of human connection. When the plates were cleared away, Oliver leaned against Ethan, drowsy but smiling. His tiny hand still clutched to crayons tightly. Lily came by to check one last time, and Oliver whispered, "Can we come back tomorrow?" The question hit Ethan harder than any business negotiation ever could. His son wanted to come back not because of the food, not because of the place, but because of a waitress who treated him like he mattered. Ethan looked at Lily, who was busy wiping another table, and then back at Oliver. He didn't answer right. Away, because deep down he knew this was not just a casual night out anymore. Something had shifted. Watching his son crawl on the floor with a waitress had opened his eyes to how empty their lives had been. Despite all the riches, he didn't know yet what it meant, but he knew one thing with certainty: everything was beginning to change. When Oliver finally grew tired of coloring and crawling, he rested his head against Ethan's arm. His cheeks were flushed, and his eyes still sparkled with happiness. Ethan felt a strange warmth in his chest, something he wasn't used to. He wasn't a man who often sat quietly and just observed life around him. In a way he hadn't seen in years, Lily came back to check on their table, her smile the same as before, genuine and bright. She poured more water into Ethan's glass and asked Oliver if he wanted another chocolate milkshake. Oliver's eyes lit up, and before Ethan could answer, Lily winked at him and said, "Don't worry. I'll make it small so your tummy doesn't hurt later." Oliver giggled, nodding eagerly. Ethan almost laughed himself. He was so used to people waiting for his approval before speaking to his son. But Lily just spoke naturally, as if she were part of their little world. When Oliver was distracted with his milkshake, Ethan finally spoke to her. "You're good with him," he said quietly. Lily tilted her head and smiled, not in the overly polite way most people smiled at him, but in a casual, almost teasing way. "I like kids," she replied simply. "They're honest. They'll tell you exactly what they want, and they'll laugh at the smallest things if you let them." Ethan studied her face. It was unusual for Ethan. Most conversations in his life were either calculated or careful. Waving it proudly in front of his father. "Look, Daddy, it's us in a rocket ship." Ethan blinked at the messy scribbles, then nodded. "That's very creative." His words sounded stiff, and Oliver's smile faltered. Lily leaned in, her voice cheerful. "Wow, that's amazing. I can totally see the rocket. That means he's the captain, right?" Oliver grinned again, nodding eagerly. He noticed the way Oliver's face softened with relief, and he felt a pang of guilt. How many times had he dismissed his son's efforts without realizing it? When Oliver was busy sipping his milkshake, Lily lowered her voice slightly. "He doesn't need much, she said. She shrugged lightly, her eyes still on Oliver. "Kids don't care about money. They just want attention. Someone who listens to their stories, even if the stories make no sense. Someone who thinks their drawings are the best thing in the world. That's what makes them happy." Ethan didn't respond right away. He had given Oliver everything: expensive toys, the best tutors, a mansion to live in, but he had not given him himself. Been absent, lost in work, thinking that his sacrifices would someday make Oliver proud. "You speak as if you know a lot about this," Ethan said finally, his voice quieter. Lily smiled faintly. "I grew up in a house where we didn't have much money, but my mom always made time for me. We'd sit on the floor and play board games with missing pieces or make up stories before bed. Those are the things I remember, not what we couldn't afford. And I see the same thing with kids who come here. The ones who laugh the loudest aren't always the ones with the fanciest clothes." Ethan felt something shift inside him. He wondered if Oliver would ever have memories like that. Ethan leaned back, letting the conversation sink into him. For years, people had given him advice about parenting: nannies, teachers, even business partners who told him to toughen up the boy. But none of their words had struck him the way Lily's simple honesty did. When she came back later with the bill, Ethan surprised himself by asking, "Do you always talk to customers like this?" His tone was curious rather than critical. Lily gave a small laugh. "Only the ones who look like they need it." She glanced at him knowingly, and Ethan was caught off guard. Very few people ever dared to hint that he needed anything. It was always the one giving, commanding, leading. But somehow this waitress had seen right through him in the span of an hour. Oliver finished his milkshake, his head resting against the booth sleepily. Ethan watched him, then looked back at Lily. "Thank you," he said suddenly. She raised her eyebrows, surprised. "For what?" "For tonight," he replied simply. His voice was low but sincere. "You've made him laugh more in one evening than I have in months." Lily's expression softened. "Sometimes all it takes is crawling on the floor." Her words echoed in Ethan's head long after she walked away to serve another table. He sat there with Oliver, dozing beside him, the crayon drawing still in his pocket, and realized how much he had been blind to. He thought being a good father meant providing, protecting, and planning. Maybe being a good father was as simple as being present, as simple as laughing with his son over silly crayon games. The drive back to the mansion was silent, except for Oliver's soft snores. Ethan looked out the car window, his mind turning over everything Lily had said. He had expected the night to be nothing more than a quick dinner, but instead it had opened a door he didn't even know existed. He saw now how distant he had been, how much his boy had been starving for attention. Usually a nanny would do it, but tonight he didn't want to hand his son over to anyone. He laid Oliver gently on the bed, pulled the blanket over him, and paused when the boy stirred. Oliver's small voice mumbled, "Daddy, can we see Miss Lily again?" Ethan's throat tightened. He smoothed Oliver's hair and whispered, "Yes, we will." For a long time after Oliver fell back asleep, Ethan sat in the dark room, the drawing still in his hand. He stared at the childish rocket and dragon, thinking about Lily's words. Something had changed in him that night. Couldn't go back. Being the same man who buried himself in work and left his son to be raised by strangers, a way his wife would have wanted. And though Ethan didn't know exactly what the future would hold, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The next few days were different for Ethan. He woke up with thoughts that had nothing to do with meetings or profits. Instead, he kept remembering the way Oliver had laughed in the diner, his tiny body wriggling under the table, and Lily's voice full of cheer as she turned spilled crayons into an adventure. It was strange for Ethan to admit, even to himself, but that evening had shaken something loose inside him. For years he had built his life around control, order, and success. Now, one waitress had broken through all that without even trying. Oliver didn't let him forget either. Every morning the boy would ask, "Daddy, can we go see Miss Lily again?" He said it with such excitement that Ethan couldn't bring himself to refuse. He had never seen his son so eager about anything before. Not about toys, not about trips, not even about gifts that cost more than most people's yearly salary. Yet here he was, begging for something as simple as dinner in a diner. So Ethan found himself driving back to that little place more than once. At first, he thought he was only doing it for Oliver. He wanted his son to have fun, to laugh, to feel alive. But soon he realized he was also going back for himself. Each time he watched Lily interact with Oliver, he learned something new. She showed patience when Oliver spilled juice, turning it into a joke instead of a problem. She encouraged him when he scribbled nonsense, calling it genius art. She even taught him small things, like saying thank you when someone held the door, or sharing crayons with the child sitting at the next table. Ethan sat in silence during these visits, just watching. At first he didn't know what to do. It was awkward for him, being in that casual, noisy environment instead of the polished world he was used to. But slowly, he began to relax. He realized he didn't have to keep up an image here. No one expected him to make speeches or win deals. He was just a father sitting with his son. One evening, Oliver tugged at his father's sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, come play too." Ethan froze. He had no idea how to play anymore. Business was his world: contracts, deals, numbers. But Lily smiled at him and said, "Go on. He just wants you to join his little game." There was no judgment in her tone, just encouragement. Hesitantly, Ethan slid off the booth and sat on the floor with Oliver. The boy squealed with delight, shoving crayons into his father's hands. It felt awkward at first. Ethan didn't know how to draw rockets or dragons. His big hands looked clumsy holding the crayons, but Oliver didn't care. He leaned against his father and giggled, pointing at the crooked shapes Ethan made. For the first time, Ethan realized it didn't matter if his drawing looked good. What mattered was that he was there with his son, sharing the moment. And that realization was powerful. As weeks passed, the change in Ethan grew clearer. He started leaving the office earlier than usual, sometimes even canceling evening meetings. His employees were shocked Ethan Carter never canceled anything, but he didn't care. The hours he spent sitting on the diner floor with Oliver and Lily were more valuable than any deal he could close. He noticed Oliver's mood improving too. The boy laughed more, asked more questions, and even hugged Ethan randomly. Something he had rarely done before. One night, after another visit to the diner, Ethan tried something new at home. Instead of sending Oliver off with a nanny after dinner, he went upstairs with him. Oliver dumped a box of toy cars on the carpet and looked at his father expectantly. Ethan hesitated only for a second before sitting down on the floor. Together, they raced cars across the room, building tracks out of pillows and books. Oliver's laughter filled the air, echoing through the big house that had been silent for so long. The nannies peeked in, whispering in surprise. They had never seen Ethan like this before. It wasn't easy. Ethan still struggled to balance his demanding work life with these new moments of play. There were times when he felt restless, his phone buzzing with urgent calls while Oliver begged him to keep playing. But Lily's words stuck with him. Kids don't care about money. They just want attention. So he put his phone away more. Often, he told his assistant to hold calls until the next day. And every time he chose Oliver over work, he saw the boy's face light up. That light made every sacrifice worth it. Rumors began to spread in the city. People whispered about the billionaire who was often seen in a small diner, sometimes even sitting on the floor with his son. Business partners joked about it behind his back, wondering if Ethan was losing his edge. But Ethan didn't care. For the first time in his life, he realized he didn't need to impress anyone. His son's happiness was the only thing that truly mattered. The bond between Ethan and Oliver grew stronger with each passing day. Oliver started running into his father's arms when he came home, chattering about his day, eager to share every little detail. Ethan listened, really listened, instead of nodding absent-mindedly while checking emails. He found joy in those simple conversations, the kind of joy money could never buy. One night after leaving the diner, Oliver dozed off in the back seat of the car. Ethan sat beside him instead of up front, watching his son's peaceful face. He thought about how far they had come in just a few weeks. He remembered the lonely boy who used to sit quietly in the mansion, and he compared him to the lively, laughing child he was becoming now. The difference was astonishing, all because one waitress had crawled on the floor and reminded Ethan what fatherhood truly meant. But it wasn't only Oliver who had changed. Ethan himself felt different. He was softer, less tense. He found himself smiling more often, even at strangers. His employees noticed he was calmer, less harsh during meetings. It was as if the weight he had carried for years had started to lift, replaced by something lighter, something warmer. Of course, not everything was perfect. There were still days when Ethan slipped back into old habits, staying too long at the office or letting his mind wander during playtime. But each time Oliver would tug at his sleeve, or Lily's voice would echo in his memory, reminding him of what really mattered, and he would choose differently. Slowly he was learning. The more time Ethan spent with Oliver, the more grateful he became to Lily. Without meaning to, she had opened his eyes and given him back the connection he thought he had lost forever. Sometimes he caught himself watching her when Oliver wasn't looking. She was always busy, carrying plates, wiping tables, but she never lost her smile. He wondered what her life was like beyond the diner, what kind of struggles she faced, what kind of dreams she had, and he realized he wanted to know more. But for now it was enough. Enough to sit in that diner, to see his son laugh, to feel himself becoming a father in the truest sense. Ethan no longer cared about whispers, rumors, or appearances. The only thing that mattered was the small boy who now reached for his hand. With trust and joy and the moments that stitched their bond back together, one silly crayon drawing at a time. Ethan sat in the diner booth one evening, watching Oliver and Lily at the table across from him. The boy was busy showing off his newest drawing, his little hands smudged with crayon colors, his face glowing with pride. Lily leaned close, listening, carefully to every word, as if Oliver's wild story about a dragon and a spaceship was the most important thing in the world. Ethan leaned back, taking in the scene, and felt a warmth inside his chest that no business deal had ever given him. The sound of Oliver's laughter filled the diner, bouncing off the walls and drawing smiles from other customers. Ethan remembered how quiet his son used to be, how the mansion had felt like an empty museum rather than a home. Now it was different. Now, laughter followed them wherever they went, and it was because of the small changes Ethan had made. changes. He never would have imagined before that first night. As he watched, Ethan realized something that made his heart heavy and light at the same time. He had spent years chasing success, thinking money could build a perfect life. None of it mattered. Not the mansion, not the cars, not the companies if his son didn't feel loved. Tonight, in this little diner with the smell of fried food and coffee, Ethan finally understood what true wealth was. It was sitting across from him in the form of a little boy and a kind waitress who had reminded him how to be a father. When Oliver finally set down his crayons, his eyes drooping with sleepiness, Ethan reached across the table and touched Lily's hand lightly. She looked up, surprised. "Thank you," he said softly. She frowned a little. "For what?" "For this," Ethan replied, glancing at Oliver. "For reminding me what I almost lost. For giving me back my son." Lily blinked, clearly caught off guard. She shook her head and smiled. "You don't need to thank me. Did it yourself? He just needed you to be there." Her words sank deep. Ethan thought about all the excuses he had made over the years, all the times he had convinced himself he was too busy, too important, too tired. But Lily was right. Oliver had only ever needed him. Somehow, this young woman had shown him how to give that. Oliver yawned and leaned against his father. Ethan wrapped an arm around him, feeling the small weight of his son's body against his chest. It felt natural now, something he no longer questioned or avoided. He held Oliver close and realized that in all the years of running after power, he had been running in the wrong direction. As they left the diner that night, Ethan paused at the door. The world outside was still the same. His driver waited by the car. People whispered as they recognized him, but something inside him was forever different. He didn't care what they thought, no longer needed to prove himself to the world. The only person he wanted to prove himself to was the little boy holding his hand in the car. Oliver drifted to sleep again, his head resting on Ethan's shoulder. The billionaire looked down at him, then out the window at the passing lights. He thought of Emily, his late wife, and wished she could see them now. For the first time since her passing, he felt at peace. Maybe he hadn't been the father she had hoped he would be, but he was trying now. He knew she would be proud of that. The days that followed were filled with more small moments that meant everything. Ethan no longer rushed through life. He made time to play with Oliver in the evenings, building castles out of pillows, drawing rockets, and telling silly bedtime stories that made the boy giggle. He found himself looking forward to those moments more than anything else. Business was still there, still demanding, but it no longer controlled him. For the first time, he was the one in control, choosing his son over his schedule. Every visit to the diner became a memory etched in his heart. Oliver would bounce excitedly as soon as they arrived, calling out for Lily, who always greeted him with the same genuine smile. Sometimes she would sit with them when it was quiet. Sometimes she'd just stop by their table between orders, but every time she brought warmth into their world. Ethan noticed the way Oliver adored her, and he felt a deep gratitude he couldn't put into words. One evening, as Oliver was busy with his crayons, Ethan found himself speaking honestly to her. "You've changed my life," he admitted. "I don't think you even realize it, but you did." Lily looked embarrassed, shaking her head. "I didn't change anything. I just played with him. You're the one who's changed." Ethan gave a small smile. "Maybe, but without you, I don't think I ever would have seen it." There was a pause between them, a moment of unspoken understanding. Lily wasn't like anyone else in Ethan's world. She didn't see him as a billionaire, didn't treat him with fake politeness. She saw him as a man, as a father, and that made all the difference. That night, after Oliver had gone to bed, Ethan sat in his study with the folded crayon drawing in his hand. The paper was wrinkled and smudged, but to him it was worth more than any painting in his mansion. It was proof of something priceless, proof that he had begun to rebuild the bond with his son, proof that he could be more than a provider. He could be present, he could be warm, he could be the father Oliver needed. He placed the drawing in a frame on his desk, where contracts and deals usually piled up. It stood there as a reminder, every day. His greatest success wasn't measured in billions, but in the smile of a little boy who now ran to greet him with open arms, as weeks turned into months. The change in Ethan became clear to everyone. Around him, His employees whispered about how their boss seemed happier, less harsh. His business partners noticed that he no longer snapped in meetings but spoke with patience. But Ethan didn't care about their opinions. The only opinion that mattered was Oliver's. And the boy's constant laughter was all the proof he needed that he was on the right path. One afternoon, Oliver climbed into Ethan's lap with a serious expression. "Daddy," he said, "you're my best friend?" Those words melted every wall Ethan had built around himself. He hugged his son tightly, promising himself he would never let him feel lonely again. No deal, no meeting, no amount of money could ever be more important than this. It all came back. To that one moment, the sight of a waitress crawling under a table with his son. What had seemed so small to others had become the turning point of his life. From that night on, Ethan was no longer just a billionaire. He was a father, a real father, one who laughed on the floor, who listened to silly stories, who treasured crayon drawings as if they were masterpieces. And he knew deep in his heart that everything had changed forever.